And good afternoon, all of you out there. This is Dr. Abe back on the air one more time. And today I'm going to present my second installment in my Communication Hero series. And at the conclusion of my last installment in the series, I had said that this individual that I'm going to be talking about today is my second communication hero, and in a lot of ways he couldn't be any more different from the first one. But both Bud Robinson and this individual have profoundly shaped many of my thoughts and much of my scholarship in the area of communication. And so today I'd like for you to meet Neil Postman. Now, anybody who is looking into Postman should really start off with this book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. This was Neil Postman's magnum opus. He wrote a number of books in his career, a number of articles. He was editor of the General Semantics journal for years and years and years. But this is his magnum opus, and it talks about how television undermines public discourse. It was published in 1985. This is where you need to start with understanding Postman. But the main reason that Postman has so shaped me as a scholar and so shaped my thinking and continues to is because he had an incredible way of simplifying the relationship between human beings, technology, and media. He had a way, though he was highly educated, he had a way of putting it so that people like you and me could understand it. He wrote in a very accessible style, and what I think is most significant about him, and I think shows his ongoing legacy as a communicator, even now more than 2 decades after his death, he died in 2003, is that his ideas have actually become more relevant and more useful in the years since his death. And that's rare. That ideas that originated mostly in the previous century are now even more relevant in the case of Postman than they were when he was writing and publishing. And I think again that's a testament to his communication ability, and that his scholarship stood the test of time. It's almost like Vincent van Gogh in a way. If you know anything about Vincent van Gogh, his artwork did not become valuable for the most part until after he died. I mean, so people didn't appreciate really Van Gogh's artwork until after he was gone. That doesn't mean people didn't appreciate Postman when he was still alive and writing, quite the contrary. But I think as the years since his death have passed and we've continued to look at his work, the just utter amazement that I have at how relevant and prescient his work was and continues to be, I think speaks volumes to his thought. Postman was what we would probably call a media ecologist, although his background was quite varied. He was a public school teacher, kind of early in his career, did some writing about public education, and then kind of transitioned into higher education later on in his life. He was chairman of the media ecology program at New York University during his, I guess what I would call his heyday. But Postman really advanced, well, more ideas than this, but he advanced 3 ideas that have really had an impact on me and that I want to focus on, because these thoughts have really shaped my approach to scholarship and communication, and especially the relationship with technology now that we have social media and AI. Postman wrote primarily in the era of television, and much of his academic work was devoted to television. But you can take his ideas on television and you can apply it to these more modern forms of technology and media. And the first idea that Neil Postman had that, again, has really shaped my thinking is the idea that technology is what he refers to as a Faustian bargain. And what that means is that all technology represents a trade-off. There's always some advantage and disadvantage to every technology, no matter how positive we might think the benefits of that technology are. For example, if you take AI and you apply that Faustian bargain concept to generative AI has a lot of benefits. It can make administrative tasks easier. For example, if an academic is trying to come up with an activity to use in class, and they're just not able to come up with anything, they can plug a query into AI, generate an activity to illustrate this concept, and the AI will do it. And a lot of times what the AI produces is quality. That is a benefit of AI. But it also has a drawback, many drawbacks, and that not the least of which, it makes cheating easier, academically, professionally, and in many other instances. And it really takes the thought and the critical thinking out of many aspects of education and professionalism. You know, I don't want an engineer who has ChatGPT'd his way through college and engineering school building the bridge across the Mississippi River 5 miles from my house. That's just the bottom line. So you see, technology is a Faustian bargain. And I think it's very important that, especially nowadays, we view technology in that light. And related to that, this isn't the second point, but related to that, we need to be asking a question, not what will technology do for us, but what might it undo at the same time. That's very related to the Faustian bargain, and was another way that Postman was fond of sort of framing that question of technology. The second aspect of Postman that I think is that has really shaped my scholarship is the idea that, and this is quoting from his book Amusing Ourselves to Death that I just showed you. He famously said, "Entertainment is the supra ideology of all discourse on television," unquote. That's a direct quote. "Entertainment is the supra ideology of all discourse on television." And I think the idea that entertainment and news intermingle, whether it's on a news app on your iPhone, whether it's on a TV news broadcast, whatever the case is, when news and entertainment intermingle, the results are quite often not good, because it becomes very hard, and Postman makes this point as well, it becomes very hard for people to mentally differentiate what is news from what is opinion, especially since many news shows recreate things. They recreate events and then they talk about it later. Well, that assumes that the recreation is accurate. It assumes that the people involved in producing the news content had an accurate understanding of what was going on, and so there's so many assumptions that are made. And when you're trying to take a medium like television that was created as a vehicle of entertainment, and that being its primary use, and then you try to recreate it as a sacred space of information, that leads to societal ruin eventually. If you want the Huxleyan, the Aldous Huxley understanding of it, who, by the way, Postman often cited as a sort of mentor in a scholarly sense. So just the idea that this, much of the public square that we rely on for our news, for our information, is entertainment based, and then we sort of rely on these networks, these websites, all these kinds of things to sort of code things for us, to tell us what is factual and what is opinion, and so forth and so forth. And some of them are better at it than others. And Postman had kind of a cautionary tale in that regard, to really be skeptical to anything that you see on television or in the information sphere, if you will. And the last idea, and this one's been really challenging me, I think, from a spiritual standpoint as well as a scholarly standpoint, is just the idea of information glut. Postman did an appearance, I believe it was in 1988, on the PBS talk show The Open Mind with Charles Hefner. And Postman made a comment, and I'm not going to remember exactly to quote it exactly, but he made a comment to the effect of, the typical problem human beings have faced over the years is information scarcity, lack of access to information. Then in 1988, and imagine how much that's compounded now, the problem is information glut. There is so much information coming at us so quickly from so many different sources that our brains lack the capacity to make sense of it all and to process it all in a meaningful way. And what that eventually leads to is societal meaninglessness, where information has no purpose anymore other than just to simply be consumed. And once you reach that point, then you sort of reach the point of no return in a social and intellectual society. You can't recover from that. And so that has challenged me, in a sense, to step back a little bit, to not be so consumed with the need to pursue information, and instead reflect, understand, and take a moment to be silent. There's a great article by Stephanie Bennett in a recent issue of the Journal of Communication and Religion, in which she talks about exactly that, addressing media glut through the practice of silence. And she quotes Postman in that article and cites his work. And I think as a Christian people, but especially as academics who deal with information as much as I do and as much as my fellow academics do, silence and the practice of silence is spiritually, intellectually, and emotionally healthy. And so I take that idea away from Postman as well. And so those are the three main reasons that Neil Postman is my second communication hero. By the way, if you're planning on looking into Postman a little bit more, I hope I've whetted your appetite a little bit, because Postman should be widely read by anybody. And his work is still highly relevant. Start off with Amusing Yourselves to Death. This is really his magnum opus. The other book I would recommend is Technopoly. This examines how technology has really shaped basically human existence, and how technology is not it's not replacing previous things, it's adding to them. So his famous illustration is when you add red dye to water, you're not, the red dye isn't replacing the water, you're getting the red dye and the water combined. And so sometimes when a new technology comes out, we think it's replacing something else, when really it's just adding to it. And sometimes that causes problems. That and much more are outlined in his book Technopoly. And maybe one of his most underrated books, and probably one of my favorites, is this book that he co-authored with Steve Powers, called How to Watch TV News. This is priceless. And even though it was written in the early 90s, this is again, read this before you watch the next nightly news broadcast and see how it changes your perspective. Well, that's it. I've really enjoyed talking with you about Neil Postman today, again, and understanding why he is such a communication hero to me. For the third installment in the series, tune in tomorrow. I'm not going to tell you who it is, but if you tune in tomorrow, you'll find out. Thanks, and have a great afternoon.